Hello, Nicholas. Welcome to the Transformational Learning Summit.
Thank you for inviting me, Lawrence. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have this conversation because of the influence that my experience with you has had on the work that I do today. So I'm curious to see what emerges in our conversation. I like to start these conversations with a question of what does transformation mean to you?
I think most fundamentally, it means gradually transforming our whole experience of reality. If you ask me for like a, one sentence,
Mm,
because I think we've got conditioned into living in a very small version of reality. And that's held in place by a lot of internal habits and a lot of deep contraction inside on an energetic and literal level. And so that's why I always speak about the work of transformation in, first of all, for ourselves, has to have two streams or two pillars. The first one is the more familiar one because it's, let's call it the pillar of awakening. And it's all the practices of meditation and mindfulness and body work, yoga, tai chi, qigong, everything that expands our awareness, takes us into a much bigger perceptual field, which already changes reality. But the second pillar, the parallel pillar, is the one that I think is much less addressed, although it's gradually becoming more into the conversation. And that's the healing pillar.
mm,
That's where we work on personal, ancestral, and collective emotion streams that are frozen inside us, without which the awakening, this work, if this work is not done, the awakening work is not enough. It doesn't work beyond a certain point. Like you can meditate, you can experience maybe expanded consciousness and so on, but it doesn't last. It's not something that's lived on a daily
mm,
basis because the whole energetic system has too much frozen energy.
mm.
So actually all of my work is energetic work fundamentally. And
You use
that's already a different paradigm from the normal view of reality. Even though I speak and I obviously wrote a book, so I can use the mind very well. But the core of the work is not in the mental.
You used the word contraction earlier and also frozen. Can you um, can you expand on that a little bit? Exactly what that means, what that looks like, how that shows up?
Yeah, I mean it's very literal, and most of us it started, when we were very young. Let's say you're 5 years old and you feel scared naturally. Something scares you, and you go to your primary caregiver, and she or he is not available, or doesn't want to hear you, or starts explaining why you don't need to be scared, and even maybe makes fun of you, whatever it is. So you're having an intense energetic experience of fear, and it's not being held. So most of the time you have only one choice in that moment to manage that, which is
Hmm.
contraction. Your whole system knows how to do that, and that's quite a remarkable intelligence. But in that moment you go into a contraction which also involves moving up out of the pelvis, because the pelvis is the core of where we're supposed to be living physically. So that happens over and over and over and over. So by the time we're adult, whole parts of the energetic structure that we are more or less frozen. And you see it. I mean, if you read energy, you understand energy, you see the way people are walking around. It's like in this state of literal, subtle, but literal physical contraction.
Mm.
So the awakening work addresses that to a certain degree. Obviously, if you do Qigong or you do yoga, it unlocks some of that contraction. But unless you do the emotional work, I don't believe the work is in any way enough. The awakening work is in any way enough. Then we add to that we also digest and ingest, let's say, the unspoken wounds, the unaddressed wounds of our ancestors, because those get frozen in the systemic reality that we're born into. So we ingest that. So we are carrying those frozen energies as well, plus in some cases collective layer as well.
Mm.
As someone once said, hurts are passed down through the generations until someone is ready to feel them.
Mm.
I think that's a beautiful sentence. You know, I was working on Sunday actually with a group of 160 German experts, expert consultants, trainers, coaches. I had 4 hours with them. And because of the presence field that opened, without me in any way prompting it, the German collective trauma field opened,
Mm.
feelingly. And it started with themes like, well, you know, we can't trust groups, we can't trust a leader like you, etc., etc. And then it started to go deeper into this trauma field, and people were crying, and people were shaking, and that's how energy then starts to move, only when it's felt. And we're walking in that. It's like we're walking up to our waist in water, but we pretend that we're dry, or we ignore the water because we don't have a language for it, and we don't have enough space to process it. But when there is a field of presence open, it starts to emerge because actually it wants to be healed. And healing is not that we change or fix it. Healing is simply that we feel it.
Mm-hmm.
No emotions need fixing or healing. We're in all kinds of mythology about that. We just need a space where it's safe enough to feel. And that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. What was it about that space that you held with the 160 people that created the conditions for that to emerge?
Well, we started with what I would regard as the core practice of presence, which is because the biggest stumbling block is that our culture has conditioned us to locate ourselves primarily in thinking. Like most of the time, most of what's going on is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So the most simple, it's interesting because it's so simple and yet so impactful. And I think, you know, mindfulness has become very popular, which in many ways is wonderful. And I don't think we've digested some of the core depth of it or purity of it. Because the moment someone starts to pay attention, even to something as simple as the breathing, but really pays attention, meaning I just notice, I notice. I'm not trying to understand it. My thinking is happening, but I'm not really bothering with my thinking. I'm choosing where I place my attention.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone really does that within a minute or two, their whole frequency has changed. They have a completely new sense of being here. I call it like relocating ourselves. So then that needs to become actually a moment to moment to moment embedded practice. That's a core part of the transformation journey, because then I'm walking around, I'm speaking with people, and my thinking is only one part of what's happening. I'm actually located in a deeper level of myself. Difficult to know what to call it, but let's just say a kind of sense of inner being. And even now, as we sit here and talk, and if we pay attention in a different way, our talking is only one part of what's happening here. Same if people are watching or listening to this. The words that are being spoken are only one part. The thinking process is only one part. There's a possibility to pay attention to a much broader field, let's say. So we have to train our attention. And what I notice more and more, and I think is very interesting, is that actually our attention is probably the only thing we can really be in control of, because we spend so much time trying to control, and we can't, and we miss the one thing we can control. And of course, I'm making it sound very simple. In some ways, it is very simple. What becomes difficult are two or three things. First of all, the habit of not doing that, the habit of thinking. Secondly, that when we start to pay attention, there's nothing else to control. We're not trying to control, we're simply noticing. So we already have to let go of a huge impulse to try and be in control. And then thirdly, probably the more difficult part of it in the end is that when we really enter into that, sooner or later we start to feel. We start to feel all the emotional layers in us that we've put away since we were 5 years old. We put them away, we froze them, but they didn't go away, they're inside. And we keep them hidden away by this thinking, doing. People medicate in a way. Like one of my senior clients had a surfing accident over Christmas. And when I met him recently, he can literally only sit, he can't move at the moment. But he said, Nicholas, this was so important because it was the only thing that was going to make me pause. And I see how we get into this. It's an addictive pattern as well, even chemically addictive. Everything other than let's be here. So presence is being here with everything internal and out and external. And that's a huge devotional practice. That to be engaged every day, forever.
One of my first memories of you, well, my first memory of you was when I attended your workshop in New York City in 2019. And
Right.
that was really, I remember coming out of that being so moved because I had what felt like a ceremonial experience. It felt like I was in some sort of plant medicine retreat, but of course it was entirely substance free. I think we were a group of, I don't know, 15, maybe 20 people in a room for 2 or 3 days. And what emerged was really profound, and it really opened up my understanding of the power of presence, and particularly in a group space. So what you described right there, uh, in many ways is kind of a personal orientation, a personal choice, but what is it about the way that you bring together a group of people that then allows that to become a shared experience?
Yeah, that's such an important question, Lawrence. So clearly, one of the most important factors in all of this in a group is some kind of creation of safety. Because for a group process to be profound, we have to make it safe enough to start turning towards what we normally don't want to turn towards, even if we don't realize that we don't want to turn towards. So, on the one hand, it's partly the cognitive needs to be engaged. There needs to be an explanation of the process. There needs to be an understanding of, like, the core principle, for instance, that no emotion is positive or negative, that our fears, our tears, our anger, we need to make safe enough space that our emotions can be unconditionally felt. So that needs to be understood, because then already we kind of make an agreement about that. And then there is I guess there is a kind of transmission that occurs from the leader. And I think, when I work with all the corporate leaders I work with, this is a big topic. What is it in your presence that makes a safe space for people? It's got to be your own alignment. It's got to be a transmission and then a gradual proof that whatever is being felt, you will be with that person. You don't go away. If someone is in deep grief, you are fully with them. And then gradually that becomes a shared experience as well. And it does take 2 or 3 days. And as that happens, the whole field of presence gets deeper and stronger. And then naturally, that's what's amazing in it. Naturally, what's inside frozen starts to melt. It's like the nature of the energy field makes that possible. It's like there's a heat, you could say, in the energy fields, a heat. And therefore, what's frozen starts to melt, and then there's more and more movement. And typically, what happens, I see now in groups, is that you go through layers. It was actually extraordinarily quick what happened in Germany, because normally it would take 2 or 3 days for a collective layer to come up, because it's super intense when you're touching, the collective grief or collective fear. It's a big energy. So normally it takes 2 or 3 days for that to happen, that the group vessel builds and builds, and the container builds, and it's a very shared experience. And then we can start to feel what's really uncomfortable to feel. So it was actually incredible that it happened in just 3.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I think that says, I don't know, well, one could speculate about what that says, but maybe things are going quicker now.
Are there particular things that particular milestones, strategies, or approaches that you take towards building that group field over, you said it can take 2 or 3 days, but are
Yeah.
there, when you're first entering a group space
Mm.
and you're bringing this intention for presence,
Yeah.
how have you kind of conceptualized the building blocks of your process?
First of all, I do a lot less conceptualizing than most people, I've come to realize. Like this event in Germany was really interesting, because I said to someone who was with me, our managing director was with me, and I said to her, I'm so curious to hear what's going to come out of my mouth.
But
And
do you actually show up with no plan and just
I had
allow?
I had no agenda until 10 minutes before we started.
Mm.
It's on the one hand, it's extremely risky, and on the other hand, it's by far the deepest place to work from.
Mm.
That said, obviously, I have a lot of milestones, so it's not like, it's more like I just don't know how it's going to organize itself.
You've also been doing this for a really long time, so it's very embedded in you.
I'm not like starting with nothing, far from it.
Mm.
But yes, so some of the milestones will always be, first of all, this learning about attention. Then we didn't do it here, but in a smaller group, we would always do some deep somatic work,
Mm.
which will start with people lying on the ground and really breathing, really getting like coming home to the body, really coming home to the body. And after a 20-25 minute process, people are like sitting in their chairs, like, oh, wow, I feel very different now because the body has opened up.
Mm.
And there's a sense of being at home in the body. That's very powerful for people. And then what I have to teach, so what are practices that help you stay with this? Because otherwise it'll just close. I mean, the moment you look at your phone in the break, it will just finish. And then a big gateway is always the emotional. Always. So we have to, first of all, we have to set up exercises that offer people the possibility of turning towards emotion. And then it goes at whatever pace people are ready for. In a leadership training group, I often get people writing things overnight, very personal things overnight, and then coming in the next morning and sharing in small groups. And suddenly there's a lot of emotion.
Mm.
Once that gate opens, the whole field changes because we are so contracted around not feeling emotion. So contracted around that. And as soon as we start to get towards emotion, then the narrative comes in. So I would regard it a very important pillar of my work, and certainly all the training I do with coaches is to get people to understand the difference between narrative and experience.
Mm.
And we've created these actually remarkable 30-minute coaching sessions, which we call matrix sessions. And people who come, we've done nearly 500 of them in organization. People who come get an explanation that they will have only 2 minutes to talk about what they want to address. And we time it and then, okay, stop. And then we just go to what is really happening. Blah, blah. No, 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 no. We don't want the narrative. Pay attention what's really happening here.
Mm.
And the results are often extraordinary. Sometimes in 20 minutes, we've touched such deep layers. And I have a team doing it, and they're like, this is unbelievable. But that depends entirely on the level of presence of the coach and the space you're holding and the open heart you're bringing that makes a safe space and stops people from the habit of narrative. We're constantly in narrative. Yeah, no, I feel a bit anxious because, no, boom, we stop. No, because. Because if you follow the because, you'll stop the feeling. We're so programmed not to feel. So there has to be a kind of relentless bring people back to what's really happening here. So those are milestones, the somatic and the emotional. And then, within the awakening pillar, there is also, there's a whole engagement with what we might call the transpersonal or the transcendent. And there are some key metaphors that I use for that, like in the Jewish mystical tradition, where they speak of how if you open the page of a book, you have all the black letters and you have a white page. And we're just fixated on the black letters. But what does it mean? See, if you really pay attention and you go through, I guide a whole meditation process. And the last part of a meditation process is, you could say, like an immersion in the white page. And we've so lost that in our culture. And then you have a sentence like Rumi's sentence, live in the nowhere that you come from, even though you have an address here. But what does that mean to really feel that? What does it mean during your day that the white page is open? Because the white page is always there. It cannot not be. It's only we who are so. So there is also a whole dialogue and edging towards that all the time.
Mm.
And that's very challenging as well for the rational mind, because you can't that has no, you can't explain that, right? I mean, you can talk about it, but it's so far beyond thinking. And that's also very challenging for wanting to be in control, because there's nothing to control there. There is only an immersion in what in Zen they call no thing. So if you're very tightly controlling things with your mind, that's quite challenging. What do you mean, no thing? Well, we have to sense it. So guiding deep meditation is also part of the work.
Mm.
And I do have, it seems I have a capacity for that, for a kind of transmission through that.
Mm. So you've used this word transmission a couple of times in capacity. Um, how do you think about building capacity for someone who's in a leadership position or is convening people? Because in the end, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, in the relationship between the convener and the collective. Yeah, and the because in some ways it sounds like there's this huge onus on the interior condition of the convener that then becomes some kind of foundation for the collective. And I wonder if yeah, how you think about that, and also what it means to really build capacity. I know in my experience, so much of working with a group now revolves around a certain internal awareness around picking up subtle internal cues that give me intelligence about what's happening in the group space. And I don't know if I can exactly explain how that works. I was trying to explain it to someone the other day and describing it as a kind of language. And just like a new language, you learn it. The information is there, the signals are there. You just have to somehow learn what they mean and the intelligence that they offer. But I wonder how you think about this, the capacity and the intelligence to make sense of what you're sensing in a way that allows you to really hold and navigate a group space in this way that invites presence.
I think these are really great questions, and there are the kind of at least two layers in what you're saying, I think. First of all, there is a huge onus on the convener. I like the way you said that. Whether it's a group leader, a coach, consultant, or leader in an organization. Because the level of coherence and presence of the convener is exactly what initially creates possibility.
Yeah.
Group, no question about it. And how is that developed? Only by ongoing, very committed work in both those streams, the awakening stream and the healing stream. That has to be the primary commitment in life. That's my primary developmental commitment, and most of that I can't do alone. I have to find the circumstances to keep doing that work, particularly the healing part. Obviously, the meditation and the body practices I can do alone, but the healing part I can't do alone. So that's an ongoing work. I mean, that's the basic answer to how do I build capacity for that?
Mm.
If there's any other way. But then I think there is an interesting at least implication in in what what we're touching here, which is at what point does the group itself become awakened, and then there is less onus on the convener, let's say. It's less solely due to the convener. You know, like I have a team now of 7 people, very, very relatively highly developed people. So when we have our away days, twice a year, they clearly recognize me as the leader and respect that. And at the same time, we go into process where I'm not necessarily the one holding it. And also where I can do my process, even though I'm the leader, I can get really vulnerable. So I think, and I think in a mature team, you can move into a more shared. I think it's very problematic when people think you can do that too quickly.
Mm.
I think that's usually just creates chaos and a reduction of possibility. But once certain thresholds are crossed in a group or a team, I think the relationship changes between the convener and the group. And I think that's a very important topic in a way. Very,
Mm.
very. Because, you know, it also brings up the whole thing of guru and teacher, spiritual teacher, and whether that is still an appropriate model. You know, people, I get very uncomfortable when people say to me sometimes, well, you're like a spiritual teacher. I'm like, I'm really, the only way I will accept that is if you understand how totally human I am and doing my own process. Don't put me on some kind of pedestal as if I, you know, don't have still many frailties and many shadows. Yes, there is a strong teaching component in what I do for sure. But the whole model of the spiritual teacher who can't be challenged or who is never really vulnerable, I'm very doubtful that that still has a place. It's a big topic. And you know, I was with a very powerful spiritual teacher for 5, 6 years, you know, super close to him. And there was a point where I felt I had to leave, not because he did anything bad. And it was a huge process to leave and difficult. And I'm very grateful that I took that step.
Mm. I think you're pointing at something that's also a really interesting topic for me, which is about the appropriate level of vulnerability in the context of holding a space, because obviously the schedule of your space holding doesn't necessarily align with the schedule of your internal life and what's going on with you, and things happen and things
Yeah,
come up for you, and you're in a position where you're holding space for a group of people, um, where it may not be appropriate for you to really share, you know, the deep pain or sorrow or challenge you're feeling around something else.
right.
And then at a different point in the life cycle of that group, it may be.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and or um yeah, something comes up in the group
yeah,
space, and how you know, the level of vulnerability that you handle that with. I wonder if you have any reflections on how you've navigated your
yeah,
own um, level of openness in a
right.
group space.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful question. So there's like there's a line where I would, up until which I'm still absolutely holding the space and could sometimes include some of my process, but only as part of really being the one who is holding the space. And then in a group like with my team, or I will go over that line and I will let go of being the one who is holding the space and just be with my process. But that's rare. But up until then, there is a point where I can include my process, but in a very, very witnessed, felt but witnessed way. And I'm doing it as part of facilitating. It's a bit difficult to explain.
Mm.
Well,
Mm.
like you see, anytime I work with the German field, whether it's with an individual or a group, part of my process naturally arises because I'm half Jewish on my father's side, and I worked a lot with his Holocaust trauma.
Mm.
So anytime, like even on Sunday, when we got into that, and one man started talking about how he'd been to Yad Vashem in the Holocaust Center in Jerusalem, and he was shaking as he was talking. And he said, all I could do was bow.
Mm.
And anyway, it was a really deep process. And then there was a point, because I was very touched by this, and there was a point where I chose to say to him, by the way, I want you to know I'm half Jewish. 160 people are witnessing this.
Mm.
And I was intensely moved by that. And I was holding the space for the process. Because then something happened in our dialogue that took it even to a deeper level for everybody. And I was also drawing on the fact that when I was studying with Thomas Hubel, we did these incredible 5-day processes of Germans and Jewish people together addressing the Holocaust, which were obviously very intense. But so there's a whole territory that I've navigated there. So I know a bit how the process works. I know a bit how it works in me. So I can hold my process in service of the group. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there is a point where occasionally I would relinquish any kind of holding role.
Mm-hmm.
That will rarely happen in a paid group where I'm paid to be the facilitator. I think that would be very rare. I would do that.
Mm.
Very rare, because it's not the deal, it's not the contract in a way.
Yeah, there's something about the distinction between sharing something to be really held by the group and processed by the group, or sharing something while still
Yeah,
very concretely holding the
exactly.
space, being
That's it.
vulnerable
That's it.
and still holding the space quite
That's,
firmly.
yeah, I'm not sharing in that sense. I'm not sharing because I need to be held by the group.
Mm.
I'm holding my own process and I'm offering it because I think it will deepen what's happening in the group.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
That's very well put, how you say it. Yeah.
I want to circle back to a question I asked earlier, but we didn't quite go into it in depth. But you just mentioned that you were familiar with this landscape. You had done these experiences between German and Jewish people with Hubel, and so this comes back to this internal language that I was talking about. There's the capacity, and then there's this aspect of intelligence that
Mm,
somehow you are able to make sense of
right.
the data that comes up inside you. And I wonder if you have um, any way of explaining that, or the way that you maybe think about that. If for someone who maybe is like, okay, I can get capacity, but what is this sense making that goes on internally?
Well, it has different. Let's stay for a moment with the example of the German Jewish, because in the processes we did, I understood some key parts of the landscape. So, for instance, in this case, when I said I'm half Jewish, the first thing he said was, "I'm sorry," really heartfelt.
Mm.
And because of the work we did, and because of having navigated this, I was able to say to him, "Thank you, but I don't need you to say you're sorry. What I need is exactly what you're doing, which is to see what happened." That's a very important difference. And it takes the process much deeper. And I think that's when, people were very deeply moved. Because I know that process. I know that in the face of that monumental horror, apology is meaningless, actually.
Mm.
Or even guilt. I feel so guilty. Yeah, I don't give a shit. I want to see with you. I want us to face the horror together.
Mm.
So
And
that's an
that's
example
and
where
that's a felt experience.
yeah, totally.
Mm.
Totally. And because I went through that in a number of times.
Mm.
So that's a very specific example, which is a bit easier to talk about in a way because it's more
But
already.
there's something about that going through it that then translates to a certain embodied intelligence. Like even as
Yeah.
you describe that going through it, I can feel in my body a certain understanding of it that would be different had you not. You know, it kind of communicates itself already on an embodied level.
Other than that, it's really, I think it's very difficult to answer your question,
Mm.
except to say, and this is one of the most challenging, simple, and transformational parts of what I train coaches to do, is to have a radical trust in the process, especially when you have no idea where it's going. And a radical trust in the process means let's just keep noticing exactly what's happening in you.
Mm.
Like I feel really numb right now. Perfect. Let's just stay with that. Let's stay with that. Let's stay with that. Let's not try and change anything. It's a radically simple, very challenging, because we want to try and we want to think we know where we're going or what should be happening here. And yet it's the most transformational of all. If we can relate, stay fully related in exactly what's happening, life moves, life starts to move, even if I'm totally stuck. And either coach or the trainer in a group say, let's just stay with that. Let's feel that together. We're not trying to go anywhere.
Mm.
There's a profound relational heart event that happens there, which is also a kind of restoration of what we all needed so deeply and almost certainly didn't have enough of in our early developmental life, that total holding. So it's a total holding of the person or of the group. Yeah, this is really difficult, but let's stay with it. It's like when we did the 5-day processes. The first day, usually everyone just got really tired and wanted to lie down, and like there was a kind of shutdown of the nervous system. And we just tried to fully accept that. Let's just notice that, yeah, we feel really tired now. Because that's the system, this is one of the great, sometimes I say in organizations, the biggest reason that all your change processes fail is because you're trying to change. You're not meeting what's here. Because if you really, really meet what's here unconditionally, something will happen, but not what you think will happen or should happen.
That's the transformation.
Yeah, that's change. Because life is movement. The core of life is movement and change. And we block that by trying to get somewhere that we think is better than here.
The noticing practice that you mentioned, that's something you'll also bring into a group space and invite everybody to notice their experience.
Let's notice what's happening here. And let's not go, let's stay with it. That's the biggest, most powerful action we can do. Not try and change it, not try and explain it, not try and overanalyze it. We feel very numb now, or we feel scared, or
It's it's almost funny because it really is so simple.
No,
You want it to be more complex, but this is the power of presence in a group space, is that you're like, well, even with my earlier questions, it's like, what's the entry point? But the entry point is just noticing what's present.
I do 1-year training programs for coaches, and this is the most simple, deep, and most challenging part. I don't do a huge amount of one-to-one coaching now because I'm more interested in group work. But every time I do, I'm still in awe of all the moments where I have to trust, having no idea where we're going here. And to be completely okay with that. Let's just keep noticing what's happening. It really flies in the face of so much patterning and conditioning, over psychologizing. And I mean, I'm a bit extreme in that, I think, but that's how I am. I always was, because from a very early age, I was exposed to experiences that were so far beyond thinking and so powerful. One of the formative ones was early on, because I was in the theater for a long time, and I was, I found a great spiritual mentor, a famous Polish man called Grotowski, and I went to his center in Poland. I guess I was about 19, 20, 21, something like that, 22. And he was just exploring consciousness by then. And we went out, we were taken out to a forest. It was February, it was like minus something or other. We were taken out to an old abandoned stable in the middle of a forest. There were about 12 of us. This was hardcore because at the beginning, the leader said, look, what we're going to do is very, very difficult. And any of you are free to leave whenever you want. But if you do, just know I will never talk to you again. Okay. Anyway, what we did was, for 4 or 5 days, we just kept going out into the forest as a group. No talking was allowed ever. And we just walked and ran. We weren't allowed to wear coats. We weren't allowed to wear gloves or anything warm.
You were naked.
What?
You were naked.
No, we were clothed, but not in.
Got it.
Warm clothes. Then we would come back and we would get into our sleeping bags, clothed, because it was so cold. And 2 hours later, we'd be woken up. We're going out again, round the clock. So, I mean, that's how they knew how to push the boundaries. This was 1977 or something. They didn't know any more subtle approaches. So, and a lot of it was suffering, real. But there were also moments of this unbelievable breakthrough into a completely different, connected consciousness with everything around and warmth from the inside. So, and then I did a lot of different trainings that were very, very, very body oriented, like Kahuna bodywork training. So my whole journey has always been deeply energetic work. Now, when I came to start working in the corporate world, it's almost like I had to find a new way to engage my mind, which I did, of course, and then, eventually wrote a book, and which won an extraordinary award. So I know how to think, but it's not the primary locus of my work in any way at all. The thinking is just a kind of cover. It's just a way of engaging a much more direct perception and a much more direct embodied experience. And that's my whole training with coaches is how to move into that presence where you feel everything. You feel what's happening in the group. You feel it. You feel what's happening in the client. Your body feels it. And then you make sense of it to a certain degree, but the information initially is felt. And it's very hard to talk about that because it's not in the realm of conceptualization, it's direct experience. And then you are tuned with that. What is very important, and this is a very essential part of the work, whether it's coaching or whether it's in leadership or anything, is actually to get much more precise with language. Because part of our huge disconnection and part of our over conceptualizing is that we speak often in a very abstract way that's not related to what's happening. It's unbelievable. You see people talking and there's a kind of fog, but people agree to participate and we use these words and then sometimes you stop and you say to someone, what do you really, it happened the other day in this group. Someone said, like, I feel very overwhelmed by blah, blah, blah. And I said, just a moment, let's tell me exactly what you mean when you say, I feel overwhelmed. And then she started saying, well, my heart is really touched by what's happening here. And she, before I even said it, she said, yeah, I see it wasn't the right word at all. We use words in a crazily imprecise way. And we all participate in that, which just reinforces the fog. Because words, when they're used well, are like, I talk about this, it's like an acupuncture needle. When you're working with someone and you as the coach find the exact words. Like I was working with a Jewish person yesterday. I was someone I'm training and we were in his process. And I said at one point, what's at stake here is your fundamental right to exist. That's the acupuncture needle. Because that goes into the core of what his experience is. So it's a big training that, and I think we need to support each other all the time because we so habitually go into narrative and abstract talking. So when I'm working with a group or with people, this is also very big part of the work. Stop this narrative. Learn to speak accurately from what is happening. When a team do that together, it changes everything.
Mhm.
The whole energy changes. It's what I call it word and energy becoming one. And it's truly transformation.
Mm.
So there is a lot of languaging and psychologizing that I respect to a degree, but I don't really engage with. Sometimes I feel even a bit naive, or kind of I should be more. Like someone the other day was saying, I've got a whole theory about the difference between feelings and emotions. You seem to just use the. I said, well, I'm not interested in that. Yeah, I don't distinguish. Maybe there is a very important distinction between feelings and emotions. It's not really of interest to me.
Mm.
I'm interested in a very direct process, what's happening inside you. And language will capture that, whether we use whatever we distinguish between feelings and emotions, what's happening inside you. And we have a whole vocabulary for that. And that is what matters.
Mm.
For me, anyway.
Mm.
And I do
Nicholas,
a lot of stuff, and I just, even in the end, I can't even follow it. I find myself like, I don't really know what you're talking about here,
mhm.
which may well be a lack in me, but that's how I am.
For me, that specific thing shows up as a felt sense that when someone is speaking and it
Yes,
just, I
exactly.
almost feel my mind disengaging because it's
Exactly. There you go.
not landing in the body.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm. Mm.
Exactly.
Nicholas, thank you for our time together. I feel like we could go on and on and on, but I know we have a limit here. And I just want to really express my gratitude for the transmission that you share and the quality of presence that I feel from you, and the way that you've channeled that and made it part of your work in a way that's really impacted my approach to working with groups and presence. And a lot of our work today is very much influenced by that first experience that I had in your
Mm.
um, New York City workshop. So I continue to very much appreciate and savor our time together.
Yeah, thank you. Me too, Lawrence. And it's wonderful to see how what you do is growing so much. And this conference is an amazing expression of that. So thank you for inviting.
Mm, thank you.